The February 1997 In Your House main event is one of my favourite WWF Championship matches of the year, and it's a match that I'm excited to talk about today. It's a main event match that I feel is underrated and overlooked, and I've never really understood why that is. Maybe it's because it took place at In Your House, maybe because at its core it's a four-way battle royal, and historically multi-man matches don't seem to get as much attention as your standard one-on-one encounters. Or maybe people just forget about it because more fans were watching WCW at the time. The Final Four is a curiosity, though it's a unique match type that has the fundamentals of a battle royal with the additions of pinfalls and submissions, and I'm sure many people would skip over it when they see the match listing on paper, but in my opinion it's one of the best WWF main events of 1997 that not only delivers inside the ring, but it had a great story going into the match itself. Today's video will take a look at the Final Four encounter between Steve Austin, The Undertaker, Vader and Bret the Hitman Hart. One of the most important aspects to any wrestling main event is the story that leads us to the competitors squaring off inside the ring. It's a very basic element of professional wrestling, and it's the element that gets us fans invested in both the match and the characters inside the ropes. It's one of those things that goes without saying, really. Tell a good story, get people talking, build up a lot of hype, and hopefully the main event goes well and the blow-off at the end was worth our time and also our money. Storytelling is so important to the overall success of pro wrestling that it can easily be considered just as important as the action inside the ring. So it's something that bookers and creative absolutely needs to get right. In saying that, it's also something that wrestling as a whole struggles with in the modern era. How do you stay new and fresh when everything has already been done? How do you sell a rivalry or matchup to a critical fan base that's seen it all before? How do you get people to get really involved in a match where they actually care about who wins and who loses? With WCW destroying the WWF in 1997 in the television ratings, and with Vince McMahon's spending budget being a lot smaller than Ted Turner's, the World Wrestling Federation would rely on the superstars they already had in order to tell their stories that the WWF hoped would make people stick with them instead of switching over to World Championship Wrestling. It was a slow process, and although the ratings show us that more people were tuning into Monday Nitro every week, it can be easily argued that the World Wrestling Federation were putting more thought and effort into the storylines being played out inside the ring. From my point of view, the WWF's creative work in 1997 was seriously on point, especially with their main eventers. The company had a rough few years in 95 and 96, but at the beginning of 1997, it almost felt like the World Wrestling Federation were going through a reboot. Sure, there was still a lot of nonsense and there were a lot of things stopping the company moving in the right direction, but a lot of new things were tried out, and when things went wrong, whether it was out of the company's control or not, the WWF were quick to turn negatives into positives. The Final Four match at the 13th In Your House event gives us great examples of the things I've just talked about here: turning negatives into positives, trying out new things, getting people invested in who wins and who loses. But maybe the most noteworthy thing about the Final Four match was the overall story that was being told going into the match itself. It was only given a few weeks to build, and again, on paper it doesn't sound like anything special, but it's a match that felt important thanks to the intriguing tale that was told heading into the pay-per-view. The bout itself was also excellent. I've come to terms with the fact that I probably like it a whole lot more than others do because nobody really talks about it all that much, but the Final Four story and match, to me, is a real showcase of what made WWF so good in 1997. As a heads up, I've talked about this time period in previous videos, but in order to get a full understanding of the match, I'm going to go over a few points again. It all started at the 12th In Your House show in December of 1996 when Bret Hart challenged Psycho Sid for the WWF title. Shawn Michaels got himself involved in the bout and Sid defeated the Hitman to retain the championship. Bret Hart was livid. The Hitman felt he was robbed at In Your House and a great injustice was done towards the excellence of execution. Bret wouldn't get an immediate rematch, but what Bret could do is enter the Royal Rumble match in hopes of getting a WWF title shot at WrestleMania. Along with having problems with Shawn Michaels, Bret was also in a heated rivalry with Stone Cold Steve Austin. Bret had returned to the WWF at the 1996 Survivor Series and he defeated Austin in a great matchup, but Austin wasn't done with Hart. The Stone Cold vs Bret Hart rivalry was just getting started, and so Bret clearly had a lot on his plate. When something went wrong for Bret that was out of his control, he was very vocal about it. And due to how the wrestling landscape was changing and how wrestling fans were also maturing as viewers, the Hitman was seen by many as a guy who just couldn't stop complaining, a crybaby. This brings us to our first point in regards to storytelling, the evolution of Bret Hart at the beginning of 1997. I spoke about this before too, but what's so good about Bret's slow heel turn was the fact that the Hitman wasn't wrong. Bret was getting robbed on a pretty consistent basis, and Bret getting robbed at the upcoming Royal Rumble pay-per-view would be the main purpose for the creation of the Final Four match. At the 1997 Royal Rumble, Stone Cold Steve Austin entered at number 5 and he dominated the matchup. That was until the Hitman Bret Hart entered at number 21. Austin's reaction to hearing Bret's theme was priceless, and just like always, the two men got the crowd amped up when they started going at it. The stakes are always high in a Royal Rumble match, but Bret Hart simply needed to win this one. His obsession with becoming the WWF champion was at an all-time high, and so the Hitman felt that winning this Royal Rumble would put him in the position where he rightfully belonged, the main event of WrestleMania with the WWF title on the line. Things were going well. The Hitman managed to eliminate Stone Cold Steve Austin towards the end of the bout, but the referees didn't see the elimination. They were too busy with Mankind and Terry Funk, and so Stone Cold slid back into the ring. He eliminated Vader and The Undertaker, two guys who also had a mini rivalry going on at the time, and then Steve Austin dumped Bret Hart over the top rope. Bret goes on a complete verbal tirade. He screams at referees, he screams at Vince McMahon at the commentary table. Once again, Bret Hart was robbed on WWF television, and Bret Hart was seemingly not going to main event WrestleMania in 1997. The next episode of Raw, the 20th of January 1997 episode, is an important night in the story of the Final Four, and the whole episode is centered around this injustice that was done to Bret Hart at the Royal Rumble. For those wanting to study the changes that the Hitman character was going through in the run-up to the double turn at WrestleMania, then this episode of Raw is simply must-see. The show starts off as normal with a formal introduction from Jim Ross, Jerry Lawler and Vince McMahon, but here comes the Hitman, still pissed off about the Royal Rumble. Bret grabs a microphone from Howard Finkel and the Hitman says he's got something to say to Vince McMahon. The Hitman says that Vince McMahon promised him a WWF title shot upon his 1996 return. He beat Steve Austin to earn his title shot at the Survivor Series, and so Bret went to In Your House in December, where the Hitman found it awfully convenient that Shawn Michaels was providing commentary during his matchup. Bret reminds us all about how Shawn Michaels cost him the WWF title, and so Bret was told he had to beat 29 other guys in the Royal Rumble in order to gain another shot at the gold. Bret went into the Royal Rumble match and he got robbed by Steve Austin, a man who Bret had eliminated from the Rumble match itself. And so the Hitman feels that he should be getting a title shot and not Stone Cold Steve Austin. Bret says he's been screwed by Shawn Michaels, he's been screwed by Steve Austin, he's been screwed by the WWF, and he's been screwed by Vince McMahon. Because he isn't getting his title opportunity, Bret drops a bombshell. The Hitman announces in the middle of the ring that he's quitting the World Wrestling Federation. He throws down the mic and he leaves the ring. Vince tries to reason with Hart, but it's no use. Bret leaves through the audience as the crowd chants, "We want Bret." Steve Austin hits the ring and Stone Cold says Bret has done nothing but cry since coming back to the World Wrestling Federation. Austin says when the going gets tough, the Harts get going back home. And Stone Cold announces that he's going to face The Undertaker later in the main event, another man who Stone Cold dumped over the top rope at the Royal Rumble. As the segment comes to an end, we see Vince McMahon leaving the broadcast position and heading backstage. A little later on, Vince returns with Gorilla Monsoon, and Monsoon is upset that Bret decided to walk out of the company. Gorilla says that he hopes Bret can hear him out though, because the president of the WWF has an invitation for the Hitman. Monsoon says there's nothing he can do about the outcome of the Royal Rumble. The record books will state that Steve Austin was the winner of the 1997 Royal Rumble match, and that's final. But Gorilla also says that Austin's victory will not entitle Stone Cold to a WWF title shot at WrestleMania. Gorilla says in order to fix this problem, he's put together a special one-of-a-kind match, a no disqualification 4-man over-the-top rope battle royal, where pinfalls and submissions will also result in elimination. Steve Austin will be allowed to compete in the match, and the men who Austin illegally eliminated from the Royal Rumble will also be included: Vader, The Undertaker, and, if he'll come back, Bret Hart. Steve Austin comes out again, and Austin reminds Monsoon that there's no instant replay rule in the WWF. This match is a farce and Austin should be getting his title shot. Austin reminds Gorilla that Bret has just left the WWF and he isn't coming back. And then Stone Cold gets in Gorilla's face, causing Vince McMahon to jump in to try to break things up. Bret returns to the arena and Bret accepts the Final Four match before challenging Austin to a fight right there and then on Monday Night Raw. The two men brawl at the entranceway before Raw takes a commercial break. We come back and The Undertaker shows up for his match with Austin. The dead man attacks Bret and Austin goes after The Undertaker in order to start the Raw main event. The match ends with both Vader and Bret Hart hitting the ring and a wild brawl breaks out. Austin tries to escape, but the Hitman grabs him at the entranceway, and the fight continues in and out of the ring as Jim Ross screams that this is it. This is our Final Four that's going to headline In Your House. Tensions continued to rise the next week on Raw when WWF Champion Shawn Michaels cut a promo inside the ring. One of these four guys were going to face HBK at WrestleMania, so Shawn came out to address his potential opponents. Michaels talked about how the WWF title brings out the best and the worst in people, but the Heartbreak Kid is happy to be bad in order to keep hold of the WWF Championship. Bret comes out and Bret tells Shawn to do whatever he has to do to keep hold of the WWF title because the Hitman wants to take it away from Shawn at WrestleMania. Shawn was scheduled to face Psycho Sid at a special Thursday episode of Raw, but Bret wasn't interested in wrestling Sid at Mania. He wanted Michaels. The Undertaker comes out and he tells Bret that he's sick of all the complaining about getting screwed. The dead man reminds Bret that it was The Undertaker who got screwed out of the WWF title a year prior at the 1996 Royal Rumble. The Undertaker promises to take Shawn's belt and his soul at WrestleMania if Shawn makes it that far. Steve Austin is then invited to the ring, but Austin says he knows an ambush when he sees it. Austin decides to wait until the Final Four, but then Vader appears from the entranceway. Vader lets Austin pass as the segment comes to an end. The following episode of Raw took place in the Toronto Sky Dome, and the show kicked off with Steve Austin versus Vader. After Austin made his entrance, Bret Hart ran down and he launched an attack. Vader got involved too, and officials had to break up the fight in order for Austin and Vader to have their scheduled match. Stone Cold would end up stunning the referee in the end and getting himself disqualified. Bret and Shawn also had a confrontation a little later on, and Vader returned during the main event to attack The Undertaker, a plan that backfired. The following episode of Raw took place on Thursday, and this is the one where Shawn lost his smile and the world title got vacated. I've made a video on this entire subject, and you should see a link on your screen now if you want to check that out. Because Shawn vacated the belt, the planned Psycho Sid match didn't happen. Sid would instead get a title shot the night after Final 4, and the Final 4 match itself would now be contested for the WWF Championship. This was big. Austin, Undertaker, Vader and Bret Hart now had a chance to win the WWF title. Bret was getting the opportunity he complained about not getting for so long. Austin was finally getting his chance to main event a WWF title match on pay-per-view. The Undertaker had a great chance of winning too because, well, it's The Undertaker. And I'll admit, I never felt Vader had much of a chance of winning the Final 4, but Vader was always great to watch anyway, so yeah, I was very excited for this match. Bret Hart said later in the show that he thinks Shawn will come back eventually. The Hitman did say that he hopes Shawn can come back because Bret has a score to settle. But honestly, the Hitman actually seemed quite sympathetic towards Shawn here. Bret also interfered in Steve Austin's match with Sid, and later in the evening, when Bret faced Vader in the main event, Stone Cold taunted the Hitman from the arena balcony. The story of Final 4 was told over the course of just a few weeks, yet it had me hooked right in. Bret getting screwed at the Rumble, quitting the next night on Raw only to come back, Shawn legitimately dropping the belt and the WWF turning that negative into a positive, the uncertainty over what's going to happen at In Your House, everything about the WWF from the Royal Rumble right up to WrestleMania 13 felt very unpredictable. And while there were some curveballs thrown at the creative team, the TV that was produced around this time period turned into must-see viewing. Who was going to leave Final 4 as champion and who was going to the WrestleMania main event? Well, let's find out. The Final 4 pay-per-view from a presentation standpoint looks like a Superstars taping. In comparison to the 1997 Royal Rumble, it looks like a serious downgrade. From the small attendance numbers right down to the entranceway setup, there's not a whole lot that's visually appealing about this entire show, but don't let that put you off. Vader, Austin and The Undertaker cut backstage promos before the match. Austin reminds us that there's no instant replay rule in the WWF and everyone saw him win the Royal Rumble. Backstage politics have kept Austin down once again, but he will win the Final 4 later tonight. Vader says his opponents have no chance of winning tonight, while Paul Bearer says the big man is leaving In Your House as the new WWF champion. Very basic stuff here. And The Undertaker says he's rediscovered his edge. The force that dominated the World Wrestling Federation in the early 90s is not far away, and there's nothing his opponents can do about it. These three men make their way down to the ring and Bret Hart gets interviewed before making his entrance. The Hitman wants no excuses tonight, the best man is gonna win, and that's Bret Hart. Here's the official match rules. Competitors can get eliminated by pinfall, submission, or getting thrown over the top rope. There's no disqualifications, and the last man standing will win the WWF Championship. Austin and Hart go to work while The Undertaker goes after Vader. Vader gets taken out with a jumping clothesline, and the Phenom then goes after Bret and Stone Cold. Austin gets hit with Old School, but Bret knocks Taker into a delayed belly-to-belly suplex from Vader. Vader and The Undertaker fight on the outside. Vader grabs a steel chair and he stuns The Undertaker for a moment, but the dead man gets a boot up and the steel chair smashes Vader in the face. The big man goes down and he blades, a blade job that would turn into a real mess as this match continues. Taker throws Vader into the steel steps before both men get back in the ring. Austin hits Bret with a jawbreaker while Vader tries to get a little revenge on the dead man, but it's no good. Vader takes a chokeslam from The Undertaker, and so far, Vader isn't having a great time here. After hitting the chokeslam, Austin hits a Stone Cold Stunner, but Taker kicks out at 2. The Hitman and Vader begin fighting on the outside, and Vader again grabs a chair, hitting Bret across the back as Steve Austin tries to eliminate The Undertaker from this matchup. Taker and Austin then go to the outside where Stone Cold tries to hit a piledriver on the dead man. Austin ends up getting backdropped on the concrete floor, and then Vader comes out to try and put Austin away with the steel steps. Austin blocks it, and Vader takes even more punishment at the bottom half of the steps. Austin then dumps the top half on top of Vader, but Vader no-sells it, swinging those big rights and lefts at the rattlesnake. There's then this spot here, and it's the only thing that can get criticised really. Vader gets launched into the opposite steps, but he decides he isn't taking the bump, and he falls into a staff member. Not sure if he was late remembering the spot, or if he simply didn't want to take the same bump again, but yeah, it didn't look great. Austin makes Vader pay with a few belt shots, and Vader gets pissed off, throwing down the ring bell before going after the Hitman. Bret and Vader fight at the entranceway while Austin and Taker do battle inside the ropes. Bret throws Vader into the audience, and Bret throws a few punches before the two men come back to the ring where Vader gets the upper hand. Steve Austin hits a flying clothesline on the dead man as Psycho Sid looks on. Remember, Sid gets a title shot the next night on Raw. No eliminations yet, and it's already been an extremely physical and hard fought matchup. Vader goes for a sharpshooter on Bret Hart, and he gets it locked in, but his technique is a little unconventional. Austin takes over, but soon enough, the Hitman and The Undertaker begin double teaming Stone Cold. All four men eventually get back in the ring, and Jim Ross says that this has turned into a car wreck as all four men take turns at hitting each other. Vader takes out The Undertaker with a clothesline while Bret Hart hits a piledriver on Stone Cold. A Vader salt then fails to hit the mark, and The Undertaker makes Vader pay by choking him on the outside with some cord. The crowd can't sit down at this point. This match has been so action-packed. The Hitman hangs on when Austin tries to eliminate him. Austin also tries to roll up Bret, but Hart kicks out at 2. The men switch it up again, and when the Hitman has trouble putting Vader down with right hands, he decides to hit a low blow. As Vader and Bret continue to fight, The Undertaker and Steve Austin have a few close calls, but they manage to stay inside the ring. Vader goes back to The Undertaker, and Steve Austin gets unceremoniously eliminated by Bret the Hitman Hart, the first elimination of the match. We're down to 3, and the Hitman and Vader decide to work together to get The Undertaker out of the picture for a little while. Bret and Vader then go at it, and a superplex from the Hitman gets delivered. The Undertaker then begins waking up as Bret applies a sharpshooter, and for some reason, The Undertaker breaks up the hold. Even Jim Ross mentions that there was no reason for Taker to do this. Steve Austin runs out again to attack Bret on the outside, and a group of officials try to break up the fight. And inside the ring, Vader is going for a Vader bomb. Steve Austin gets in the ring with Bret Hart as The Undertaker wakes up, and Vader gets eliminated with a low blow. So now there's only 2 left. The Undertaker hits a clothesline on Austin, and Stone Cold goes back to the outside. Bret tries to take advantage, but he runs into a chokeslam. It looks like it's all over, and The Undertaker is gonna win it. Austin tries to eliminate Bret Hart when Taker goes for a tombstone, but it doesn't work out. Bret again tries to take advantage when Austin distracts The Undertaker, but the dead man kicks out of a roll-up. Bret and Austin then fight at the ring ropes, and The Undertaker tries to remove Austin from the equation. But Bret once again sees an opportunity, and The Undertaker gets clotheslined over the top rope. Bret Hart wins the Final 4 match, and Bret Hart wins his 4th WWF Championship. So much going on in this match, it's absolutely non-stop, and all 4 men had a great showing here. The story they had going in was great, and they capitalised on that great story by having one of the most fun WWF main events of 1997. Psycho Sid comes down to remind Bret Hart about their match on Monday Night Raw. And in that match, or in those matches, Bret Hart got robbed again when Steve Austin got involved. After multiple match restarts, Bret lost the WWF title the very next night on Raw, and so Bret's complaining would continue, eventually leading to the WrestleMania 13 submission match and the full heel turn that followed. But I've covered all of this previously, and this will be the last time I visit early 1997 in WWF. I really just wanted to bring more attention to the Final Four match with this video, and hopefully you'll take the time to check out the full bout once you're done with this upload. If you have the means, make sure you watch the story unfold in the weeks leading up to In Your House, and then take a moment to realise that the WWE seriously struggles to tell stories like this during modern times. Stories that truly elevate the importance of their main events, and stories that naturally drive us towards a main event match. I'll leave some video links at the end of this video though that goes into more detail about early 1997 should you want to stay within this time period for a little while. Thank you very much for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and take care.